that one of the ways that we're talking about unlocking now is through vaccine passports. So the Prime Minister is facing a growing rebellion from his own party over the issue of COVID passports. Earlier in the week, Boris Johnson said that the government plans to introduce the requirement that anyone visiting a nightclub or a venue which attracts large crowds will need to show proof of vaccination from September. However, a large number of Tory MPs are threatening to boycott this year's party conference if they need to show a COVID passport to attend. I mean, I've got some of the names here. We've got Steve Baker, Craig McKinley, Andrew Bridgen, Mark Jenkinson, Chris Green and Peter Bone are the ones we know of so far. There may yet be more.
Is your name there? I'd love to know.
I think my team would be so disappointed if I said there's no conference for anyone.
Oh, because they want to go for the party.
They do want to go for the party, but obviously for the vital work activities that take place there as well, of course. No, I mean, I'm really unhappy with the idea of vaccine passports, mainly because we said we wouldn't. I mean, we've been quite clear all along that this isn't something that we were looking at, and now apparently we are, which I think is a little bit uncomfortable. But also, you know, we've gone down this path of rolling out the vaccination at such a rapid rate. We've got such a high proportion of the population now vaccinated. Surely we don't need these measures. Surely the irreversible plan to unlock means that we can unlock safely. And if it's safe to go to a nightclub now without showing proof of COVID vaccination status, and I'm not sure why in September it wouldn't be, but what about you, Arlene?
And that's why I'm a bit confused as well, because we did talk in Northern Ireland about vaccine passports in the middle of the pandemic as a way of opening up places, to enable places to open up. And we talked about doing some pilots in relation to that. But I think to talk about now vaccine passports in September, when you've already opened up these destinations, I find it a bit strange. And it's why we would do this at that time. And put that into context as well, of course, everybody else is against the vaccine passports. So is Boris going to face a defeat in the Commons in relation to this?
Well, Labour, I mean, it seemed to be all through the pandemic that all Starmer did was wait for the next government statement, cheer loudly and say perhaps you should go even faster. But it does look, Paul, doesn't it, on this question of vaccine passports, that Labour is finally going to provide some opposition. And if there are 42 Conservative MPs at the moment, you know, signed up to be against this, I wonder, come September, maybe Boris Johnson is facing his first proper parliamentary defeat, and maybe the Labour Party, maybe your party, Paul, is becoming an opposition party again.
Well, I was looking for an excuse to get out of going to Labour Party conference. That could have been a blessing, in disguise. It's not been a particularly happy affair when I've attended over recent years. But on a serious note, no, I think it's distinctly un-British, actually, this idea that you should be required to show that you've had a particular medical procedure before you're allowed to go to a football game, before you're allowed to go into churches, from what we're told, before you're allowed to go into nightclubs. The reality is the link between infections and deaths, if it hasn't been broken, it's been severely weakened. I think we can all see that. And I think the statistics show that for the last, certainly yesterday, for the previous 4 days, the number of infections was decreasing. So I'm uncomfortable about the fact that we're saying to millions of people that you know, you have to give this proof. I just wonder whether it's a bit of a ploy, actually, to try and nudge people into. There's this vaccine hesitancy that we hear about, and I suspect the government, which I think would be an unethical thing to do, but I think they may be just, you know, trying to fire a warning shot across people's bows, saying, look, unless you go and get the vaccine, this is what it's going to mean for you, without necessarily really being sure about seeing it through.
And how much of that do you think is directed towards younger people? Because we know that vaccine take-up amongst younger people is actually much lower, I think, than anticipated. And talking about nightclubs first and foremost, I mean, do we think that this is that sort of ploy, as Paul says?
I mean, Paul may be right. You know, it may be a ruse, you know, to get young people to get vaccinated by threatening them you can't go to the nightclub or you can't go and watch Premier League football or whatever it may be. I'm not so sure. I think what we've seen really from the start of the pandemic is central government just taking more and more and more power and being very reluctant to give it back. And I think the real concern about vaccine passports is that it is the first step towards ID cards. It is the first step towards us having to show who we are when we're walking down the street or going about our daily lives. And I've always thought we were a different country. I mean, after all, we did have ID cards, but after the war we got rid of them because people didn't want to carry them. And that's my fear. My fear is the so-called libertarian Boris Johnson actually is a bit of a centraliser.
I was just going to say it'd be very interesting to see, though, what advice he's been given on all of this, because we shouldn't forget, Nigel, that there's a public inquiry coming at the end of this into COVID.
When?
When it happens. And those of us who will have to appear in front of the public inquiry are very conscious of that. And I'm just bringing that into the conversation, you know, because I have no doubt that people are saying to him, you need to bring this in order to safeguard. And if he goes against that advice, how is that going to look in the public inquiry?
Well,
just a thought.